Charleston, South Carolina. The humidity clings like a second skin, heavy with the scent of lilies and impending violence. My name is Beatrice Palmer, and I am currently the only thing sitting between my sister and her perfect engagement photo. She is smiling down at me, her fingers digging into my arm, and in exactly 10 seconds, she is going to push me down a flight of marble stairs. The champagne tower glitters above us, a fragile monument to a family that would rather break my neck than break their silence. I just didn't know that falling would finally teach me how to fight back. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The sound of the $300 bottle of champagne shattering against the marble floor wasn't the thing that scared me. It was my sister's smile right before she ambushed me. It was a practiced, camera-ready tightening of the lips that I had seen 1,000 times before on her Instagram feed, usually captioned with something about gratitude or blessings. But here, in the suffocating humidity of a Charleston evening, surrounded by the smell of magnolias and old money, that smile meant only one thing: I was in the way. I was sitting in the middle of the crowded ballroom of the historic Archibald Mansion, clutching a glass of sparkling water I didn't want, feeling like a crow in a cage of doves. The theme of Harper's engagement gala was springtime renewal, which meant an aggressive amount of pastel chiffon, soft jazz, and white lilies. I was wearing the pale blue dress my mother Linda had insisted upon, but there was no hiding the matte black frame of my ultralight wheelchair. To anyone else, my chair was just a mobility aid. To me, it was my legs, my freedom, and the only thing I truly owned. I had bought it with back pay from my disability checks and the meager savings I had left from my life before. It was sleek, aerodynamic, and strictly utilitarian, a stark contrast to the whimsical fairy tale Harper was trying to direct. Harper swept past me, her silk train rustling against my wheels. She leaned down, the smell of expensive perfume and champagne wafting off her. "You look like a funeral in the middle of my fairy tale, Bee," she whispered, her voice low enough that the guests nearby only saw a loving sister leaning in for a confidence. "Couldn't you have draped something over that metal? It ruins the aesthetic." I tightened my grip on the push rims. "I'm happy for you, Harper. Congratulations on the engagement." "Just try not to make this about you," she hissed, straightening up and flashing a dazzling smile at a passing waiter. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that. It was the family mantra. 2 years ago, I was an EMT working 60-hour weeks, addicted to the adrenaline of saving lives. I was the strong one. Then came the night Harper drove us home from a graduation party. She was texting her boyfriend, now fiancé, Austin Rivera. I saw the headlights, I screamed her name, and then the world turned into screeching metal and pain. When I woke up in the ICU, I couldn't feel anything below my waist. My parents, Mark and Linda, were at my bedside, but not to comfort me. They were there to coach me. Harper was just starting her career as a lifestyle influencer. A DUI or a reckless driving charge would destroy her brand before it began. They begged me to say I was driving. They pressured me to say I had been the one drinking, even though I had been sober. "Protect your sister," my father had said, his eyes hard. "She has a future, Beatrice. Don't destroy the family." So I did. I took the blame. I lost my license, my career, and my ability to walk, while Harper became the survivor who heroically stood by her reckless, disabled sister. They rewrote my history from heroic EMT to reckless burden. The humiliation continued as the night wore on. My mother appeared, her smile tight and anxious. "Beatrice, honey, maybe you could park yourself behind that floral pillar over there. You're blocking the flow of traffic to the buffet." I moved because fighting them was exhausting. From the shadows, I watched Harper hold court, the perfect community princess. When I tried to give her my gift, a framed photo of us as kids at a 4th of July parade back when we actually liked each other, she barely glanced at it. "Oh, cute," she said, handing it to an assistant like it was a dirty napkin. "Not really on brand for the unboxing video, but thanks." I felt the familiar burn of tears, but swallowed them down. Then I saw her. Dr. Imani Rhodes. She was standing near the bar, looking regal in deep purple. She was Austin's aunt, but more importantly, she was the trauma surgeon who had been on call the night I was brought in. She knew. She had seen the bruising pattern from the seatbelt that proved I was in the passenger seat. She had seen my blood work clean. We locked eyes across the room. Her gaze was heavy, knowing. I wondered if she remembered the girl whose chart screamed innocent, while the police report screamed guilty. Suddenly, the photographer clapped his hands. "Family photos! Everyone center stage, please! Harper Austin parents and— yes, the sister." I wheeled forward, dread pooling in my stomach. The photographer had set up a beautiful tableau on the marble steps leading to the terrace. In the center, he had placed a single high-backed wooden chair. It was narrow and unstable, completely unusable for someone with a T10 spinal injury. I couldn't hold my trunk up in a chair like that without support. "I can't sit in that," I said quietly to my father. "Just make it work, B," Mark muttered, fixing his tie. "Don't cause a scene." Harper descended upon me. The guests were watching, smiling, waiting for the heartwarming image of the beautiful bride and her disabled sister. Harper grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep with surprising strength. "Get out of that chair," she whispered through her teeth, her face inches from mine. "Or get out of my frame. I won't let you erase me with your drama again." "Harper, let go, I can't." She didn't listen. She yanked me upward, trying to force me to stand or transfer, I didn't know which. But I had no balance. My center of gravity pitched forward violently. My hand flailed, catching the tablecloth of the display table next to us. I felt the weightlessness of the fall before the pain. I flew forward, crashing into the tower of champagne glasses. The world exploded in a shower of crystal and liquid. I hit the marble steps hard, my shoulder taking the brunt, followed by the sickening crack of my head against the stone. The screaming started instantly, distant and muffled. The last thing I saw was the white ceiling spinning above me before the darkness swallowed everything. The first thing I tasted was blood, hot and metallic, mixing with the sugary sting of spilled champagne. I was lying on my back, staring up at the vaulted ceiling, which seemed to be throbbing in time with the sharp spike of pain behind my eyes. I tried to push myself up, but my arms felt like lead, and below my waist there was only the familiar, terrifying dead weight. Panic flared in my chest, not just because I had fallen, but because I couldn't tell if I had broken my neck. I couldn't turn my head. I was trapped in a sea of broken glass and expensive silk. Above me, Harper wasn't checking for a pulse. She was screaming, "My dress! You clumsy idiot! Look at my dress!" Her voice was shrill, piercing through the fog of my concussion. "Get up! Stop making a scene! God, why do you always have to be so dramatic?" The guests were hovering in a tight circle, a wall of tuxedo legs and pastel hems. I saw faces peering down, frozen in that paralyzed mix of horror and politeness, unsure if they should help or look away. I gasped for air, trying to tell them not to move me, but the words caught in my throat. Then the circle broke. A figure in purple knelt beside me, authoritative and calm. It was Dr. Imani Rhodes. She dropped her beaded clutch into a puddle of champagne and placed her hands firmly on either side of my head, stabilizing my cervical spine. "Nobody moves her." Dr. Rhodes's voice boomed across the silent ballroom, cutting off Harper's tantrum instantly. "Call 911. Tell them we have a suspected spinal trauma and assault. I need a C-collar and a backboard now." "She's fine." Harper snapped, her face flushed with humiliation. "She's just looking for attention. She does this." Dr. Rhodes didn't look up. Her eyes were locked on mine, checking my pupil response. "I know you," she said softly, her voice low, but carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs nearby. "Beatrice Palmer. You were the passenger in the Palmer crash 2 years ago. I treated you." The air in the room shifted. I saw the realization hit Beatrice's eyes. She remembered the truth. "She's lying," Harper interjected, her voice rising in pitch. She looked around at the guests, desperate to reclaim the narrative. "My sister, she has problems. Munchausen, maybe. She slipped trying to stand up because she's jealous. She's been trying to ruin this night since she got here." Dr. Rhodes turned her head slightly just enough to address the room without compromising my neck. I saw the original ER records, Harper. Beatrice's blood alcohol level was 0.0. The bruising on her chest matched the passenger seatbelt. The police report listed the driver as Harper Palmer, distracted by a phone. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw my parents near the edge of the circle, their faces draining of color. For 2 years, they had curated a story where I was the drunk, reckless driver who ruined her own life, and Harper was the innocent victim. In 3 sentences, a stranger had shattered it. "That's not true," Harper shrieked, but her voice cracked. "I saw it," a deep voice rumbled. Deacon Rob Kim, a pillar of our church and a man whose word was iron in this community, stepped forward as the sirens began to wail in the distance. He looked straight at the arriving police officers who were pushing through the doors. I was 10 feet away. Harper grabbed Beatrice by the arm and yanked her out of that chair. She didn't slip. She was ambushed. The paramedics descended, then a blur of neon and Velcro. As they collared me and lifted me onto the board, the pain in my head spiked to a blinding white. Through the chaos, I saw Harper standing alone on the lawn, the officers asking her pointed questions. My parents were there, but they weren't rushing to the ambulance. They were flanking Harper, shielding her, pulling her close as if she were the one who had just been assaulted. The ambulance ride was a haze of vitals and flashing lights. By the time I was settled in the ER bay, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me cold and nauseous. The scans came back quickly. No new spinal fractures, thank God, but a severe concussion and lacerations that required stitches. I was lying in the dimly lit room, staring at the privacy curtain when the curtain swept back. It wasn't a doctor. It was a woman in a sharp navy suit with eyes that looked like they missed nothing. "Beatrice Palmer, I'm Assistant District Attorney Carla Mendoza." She pulled a chair close to the bed. "We have multiple witness statements, including Deacon Kim's. Based on the medical report and the intent described by witnesses, we're looking at aggravated assault on a disabled person. In this state, that carries a sentence of 10 to 12 years. I stared at her, the number echoing in my pounding head. 10 years. Mendoza leaned in closer, her voice dropping. "And there's something else. In reviewing the background for this incident, I pulled the file on your car crash. The physical evidence described by Dr. Rhodes, the seatbelt marks, the blood work, it never matched the statement you gave the police. It contradicts the story your family told." My stomach dropped. I admitted to driving. I whispered, the old lie tasting like ash. "I know what you said," Mendoza replied. "But if we open this up, if we pursue Harper for the assault tonight, everything comes out. And if it turns out your parents coerced you to lie to an insurance company and the police, that's insurance fraud. That's obstruction of justice. That's coercion." She let the silence hang heavy between us. The implications were terrifying. I wasn't just looking at Harper going to jail. I was holding a grenade that could blow up my parents' lives too. Mendoza stood up, smoothing her jacket. "You've been sacrificed to protect them once already, Beatrice. The question is, do you let them erase you again?" The fluorescent lights of the hospital room hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz that seemed to synchronize with the throbbing in my skull. I was drifting in and out of a medicated doze when the door slid open. My parents, Mark and Linda, stepped in. They looked wrecked eyes, red-rimmed clothes rumpled, but as they approached the bed, I realized their devastation wasn't for the daughter lying in the hospital gown. It was for the one currently sitting in a holding cell. "B," my mother breathed, rushing to my side and taking my hand. Her grip was clammy. "Oh, thank God you're awake. We've been so worried." I didn't squeeze back. I just watched them. "The police are talking crazy," my father said, pacing the small room. He wouldn't look at me directly. "They're talking about felonies, Beatrice, for an accident. Harper was just trying to help you up. She lost her balance. You know how clumsy she gets when she's stressed." "She didn't lose her balance, Dad," I said, my voice raspy. "She pulled me. It was a misunderstanding." Linda interrupted, squeezing my hand harder, her nails digging in. Family protects family B. We all made sacrifices after the crash. We all did what we had to do to keep things together. You can't destroy us now. You have to tell them you fell. There it was, the script. I looked at my mother's desperate face, and suddenly the fog lifted. It wasn't just the crash. I saw my whole life spooling out backwards like a film reel. The time Harper broke the neighbor's window and I took the blame because Harper had a recital. The time money went missing from Mom's purse, and I was grounded for a month so Harper wouldn't miss prom. I had always been the vessel for their sins, the shock absorber for their golden child. They hadn't protected me after the car crash. They had erased me to keep their narrative clean. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was insurance. I'm not lying this time, I said. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. 2 hours later, the room changed occupants. Ada Mendoza returned accompanied by a man introduced as Riley Shaw, a court-appointed civil attorney. Riley looked tired but sharp, holding a thick file. We have a situation, Mendoza began, cutting straight to the point. Given the witnesses and your medical history, we have Harper dead to rights on aggravated assault. If we go to trial, I will push for the maximum, 10 to 12 years, and I will likely open the investigation into your parents for the previous crash. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. 10 years. It felt like annihilation. However, Riley interjected, opening the file. Harper's defense team knows they're drowning. They've floated a plea deal. Harper pleads guilty to aggravated assault. She serves 2 years in state prison, likely out in 18 months with good behavior. 2 years, I scoffed, for trying to break my neck. There's a condition, Riley continued. To secure this plea and avoid the trial that would expose the rest of the family's crimes, they are offering full restitution. We've calculated your medical bills, pain and suffering, and the estimated cost of your future care needs. They are offering $450,000. I stopped breathing. $450,000. The condition is that the funds must be wired to a trust in your name within 7 days before the plea hearing, Mendoza added. If the money isn't there, the deal is off and we go to trial on everything. I looked out the window at the parking lot. It was such a brutally American dilemma. Justice or survival. 10 years of prison for Harper would be a moral victory, but it wouldn't buy me a wheelchair-accessible van. It wouldn't get me out of the subsidized apartment with the broken elevator. It wouldn't pay for the physical therapy insurance denied. The money represented a life I had been told was impossible for me. I was still wrestling with the choice when my parents returned that evening. The sorrow was gone, replaced by a brittle, vibrating anger. They had clearly spoken to Harper's lawyer. You're going to let them lock up your sister? Mark raged, his voice booming off the tiled walls. For a stupid accident, 2 years, Beatrice. She'll lose her fiancé, her reputation, everything. She should have thought about that before she attacked me, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Linda burst into tears, but they were weaponized tears. You are so ungrateful. After everything we did for you, we took care of you when you were crippled. We fed you, we housed you, and this is how you repay us, by holding your sister for ransom. I didn't ask for a ransom, I said. The state set the terms. I'm just accepting them. You're destroying this family, Mark shouted, pointing a finger in my face. Something inside me snapped. It was the final tether that bound me to their approval. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw 2 strangers who were terrified of losing their status, not their daughter. Here is what is going to happen, I said. My voice was quiet, but it stopped Mark mid-shout. I will sign off on the plea deal, 2 years, but only if the restitution is paid in full. And I want to be clear, the money doesn't come from Austin. It doesn't come from a GoFundMe. It comes from you. Mark's jaw dropped. What? You liquidated my truth to buy Harper's future 2 years ago, I said, feeling a strange cold power rising in my chest. Now you can liquidate your assets to buy her freedom, sell the boat, mortgage the house. I don't care. But you are going to pay for the choice you made. Mark turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He leaned over the bed, his voice a venomous hiss. If you do this, Beatrice, if you take this money and send your sister to prison, you are not our daughter anymore. You are dead to us. I looked him in the eye, feeling the last piece of heartbreak settle into a hard, diamond-like resolve. I'm starting to realize I never really was, I replied. They stormed out the door, slamming so hard the privacy curtain jumped. We'll fix this without you, Mark yelled from the hallway. Don't think this is over. I lay back against the pillows alone in the silence, listening to the hum of the lights. I was an orphan now, effectively. But for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel helpless. I felt dangerous. The next 7 days were a siege. I remained in the hospital partially because my concussion was still causing dizzy spells that made the room tilt like a sinking ship, but mostly because Dr. Rhodes and Ada Mendoza agreed it was the only place I was safe. My room became a war room. Riley Shaw, my civil attorney, visited daily, mapping out the grim landscape of what was happening outside these sterilized walls. We prepared for the intimidation, the media circus, and the inevitable backlash from a community that preferred its tragedies polite and silent. Dr. Rhodes stopped being just a surgeon and became the aunt I should have had. She checked my vitals, but she also sat with me during the long insomniac nights, quietly affirming that my demand for justice wasn't an act of malice. You aren't breaking the family, Beatrice, she told me one evening, her hand resting on my shoulder. You're just refusing to be the glue that holds their lie together. There is a difference. My parents, true to form, didn't spend the week reflecting on their choices. They spent it trying to rigorous the game. On day 3, I received a call from Deacon Rob Kim. His voice was shaky. He told me that my father had visited him at the rectory, subtly suggesting that the church's upcoming renovation fund might suffer if the deacon misremembered the aggression of the assault. He implied I was seeing things, Rob said, that maybe the lighting was bad, that good Christians don't cause trouble. 2 days later, Mendoza stormed into my room, her face tight with controlled rage. My mother had tracked down a guest who had filmed the incident on their phone, a distant cousin's college roommate. Linda had offered to help with his student loans if the video file unfortunately corrupted itself. But she had miscalculated. The guest, disgusted, had gone straight to the police. Mendoza issued a formal warning to Mark and Linda: one more step, one more phone call, and they would be facing immediate witness tampering charges. The noose was tightening not around me, but around the narrative they were fighting so desperately to preserve. Outside, the story had broken. The local news ran headlines like, "Influencer bride accused of assaulting disabled sister." And the internet did what it does best: it chose sides. I made the mistake of checking the comments once. Half the town whispered that I was a vindictive leech trying to ruin my sister's life for a payout. But then the messages started coming into my private inbox. Strangers mostly. People who had been the scapegoats in their own families, the black sheep, who carried the burdens so the golden children could shine. They told me to hold the line. I realized then that this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a referendum on truth. As the deadline for the plea deal approached, Riley kept me updated on the financial bloodletting happening across town. To raise the $450,000 in cash, my parents were scorching the earth of their own future. They liquidated their retirement accounts, incurring massive penalties. They sold the boat my father loved more than he loved his children. Riley showed me the paperwork for a high-interest hard money loan against their house, a desperate predatory loan that would likely bleed them dry for a decade. I didn't feel glee. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a grim, icy calm. They were doing it again. They were incinerating their own security to protect Harper, just as they had incinerated my reputation 2 years ago. The money wasn't a gift. It was proof of who they valued. They were willing to bankrupt themselves for the daughter who tried to erase me, but they hadn't been willing to pay for a ramp for the daughter they broke. On the 7th day, with only 40 minutes left before the court filing deadline, Riley's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, then at me. The wire just hit the trust account. It's fully funded. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since the gala. I signed the victim impact statement with a steady hand. I didn't want their destruction. I wanted my life back. The plea hearing was surreal. I attended in my wheelchair flanked by Riley and Dr. Rhodes. Harper stood before the judge stripped of her glamour. No extensions, no contour, just a terrified young woman in a gray blouse who looked smaller than I had ever seen her. My parents sat in the bench behind her, and the sight of them was shocking. They looked like they had aged 10 years in a week, hollowed-out gray face staring at the floor. The judge read the charges. Harper, her voice barely a whisper, pleaded guilty to aggravated assault. Then it was my turn. I wheeled myself to the center of the aisle. I didn't shout. I spoke clearly into the microphone, my voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. I talked about the ambush at the gala, but mostly I talked about the silence. I talked about being erased, about the peculiar American violence of demanding the injured protect the reputation of the injurer. I don't want my family destroyed, I told the judge, looking briefly at the backs of my parents' heads. I just want the means to survive the injury they allowed to happen. I want my independence. I want to exist on my own terms. The gavel came down. 2 years in state prison. Harper didn't scream. She just wept, a silent, shaking sobbing that filled the room. As the bailiffs moved to take her into custody, I turned my chair to leave. I had to pass my parents to get to the exit. My father wouldn't look up, but my mother turned her head. Her eyes were black holes of resentment. "You've ruined us," she whispered, the venom clear and concentrated. I paused, my hand on the rim of my wheel. I looked at the woman who had birthed me and then sacrificed me. No. I thought, though I didn't say it aloud, saving the energy for the push through the heavy oak doors. I just stopped letting you ruin me. I pushed open the doors and rolled out into the blinding, beautiful sunlight. 18 months later, the air tasted different. It wasn't heavy with the scent of magnolias and humidity anymore. It was crisp, thin, and smelled of pine. I had moved to Denver, a city of wide sidewalks, aggressive ramp accessibility, and a skyline that didn't feel like it was judging my pedigree. My apartment was nothing like the stifling, antique-filled rooms of my childhood home. It was modern, sparse, and entirely mine. The counters were lowered, the hallways were wide, and for the first time in 3 years, I could move through my entire world without asking for permission or help. The restitution money hadn't bought happiness. Money can't do that, but it had bought the tools for a life. I used a chunk of it to buy a customized van with a specialized hand control system and an automated ramp. I called it the Tank. It was the first time since the crash that I could just leave the house because I wanted coffee or because the sunset looked nice without scheduling a rideshare or begging a favor. I also paid off every cent of my medical debt. The rest went into training. I wasn't an EMT anymore, my body couldn't handle the lifting, but I had pivoted. I was now working as a dispatch trainer and patient advocate, teaching emergency responders how to communicate with trauma victims. I used my own voice, the one my parents had tried to silence, to make sure others were heard. My recovery was slow, a game of millimeters rather than miles. I spent 3 afternoons a week at a specialized neurological rehab center. There were no miracles here, no cinematic moments where I suddenly stood up and ran. But there was progress. Strapped into a bodyweight support harness, sweating through my shirt, I concentrated until the world narrowed down to a single point of connection. "Push," my therapist urged. And for a fleeting second, I felt it, a dull, ghostly pressure in my left foot. It wasn't functional walking, but it was a signal. My nerves were finding new pathways. My body, like my life, was refusing to be erased. The biggest change, however, wasn't the van or the therapy. It was the people. My circle was small, but it was fortified with steel. There was Jordan Ellis, a former firefighter turned dispatcher, who had a dark, biting sense of humor that matched mine perfectly. And there was Nadia Flores, my next-door neighbor, and a single mom who traded her incredible enchiladas for my help tutoring her teenage daughter in biology. I was sitting at my kitchen island helping Nadia's daughter with her chemistry homework when I finally opened the letter. It had arrived 2 days earlier, forwarded by Riley Shaw's office. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky, stripping away the calligraphy-perfect loops Harper used to practice. Harper was out. She had been released early for good behavior and was living in a small town in Ohio, working double shifts at a diner. I read the words twice. It wasn't a flowery plea for forgiveness, it was clumsy and raw. She admitted it, all of it. She wrote about how prison had stripped her down to zero, how she had no audience there, only consequences. I stole your future because I was terrified of losing mine, she wrote. I let mom and dad sacrifice you because it was easier than being the disappointment. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I'm trying not to be the kind of person who would erase her own sister anymore. I put the letter down. I felt a complex cocktail of emotions, sadness for the wasted years, relief that the truth had finally landed, and a vast cooling distance. There was no burning rage left. That had burned itself out in the courtroom. But I realized I didn't want to reply. I didn't need to. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't require reunion. I could wish her well and still keep the door locked. I could release the weight of the hate without handing them the knife back. I wheeled over to the closet and pulled down the last box of photos I had brought from Charleston. I sifted through them, finding the ones where I had been cropped out, the ones where my parents had positioned themselves to block my chair, ensuring the perfect family image. I didn't cry. I just placed them in a dark box, taped it shut, and shoved it to the back of the shelf. Then I pulled up my digital medical file and made one final administrative change. I deleted Mark and Linda Palmer from the emergency contact field and typed in Jordan Ellis. That evening, the 4th of July, the sky above Denver exploded into color. We were on the roof of our building, Jordan, Nadia, her daughter, and me. We were drinking cheap beer and eating tacos, the sound of laughter drowning out the distant boom of the fireworks. You know, Jordan shouted over the noise, gesturing to my silhouette against the flashing lights. With the dramatic backstory and the high-tech chair, you really do have the perfect villain origin story. I threw a tortilla chip at him, laughing a real deep laugh that shook my ribs. I'm not the villain, I said, watching a gold starburst fade into the night. I'm just the one who survived the plot twist. As the finale lit up the faces of the people who actually chose me, I felt a profound sense of peace. My parents had lost their retirement. My sister had lost 2 years, and I had lost the illusion that they would ever love me the way I needed. But on nights like this, with my wheels humming on the warm pavement, and my people at my side, I realized the real revenge was simple. I had stopped letting them define who I was. I was Beatrice Palmer, and the rest of the story belonged to me. And with that, Beatrice closed the chapter on her past to finally write her own future. If you found satisfaction in her stand for justice, please consider subscribing for more narratives like this. We want to hear your take. Would you have replied to Harper's letter? Drop a comment below. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.